was delighted to become an education investment area, seeking a new 16 to 19 specialist school. But I am still waiting, Mr. Speaker, for Wave 15 of the free school programme to be announced so I can bid for the long overdue free school in Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Torque. We need to improve academic outcomes and destinations. When is that coming?
Well, my honourable friend always champions his area passionately, and I recognise the strong bid he's put in. Of course, the educational investment areas provide that opportunity to have extra free school provision within them.
Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, has the Secretary of State seen the latest report from the Autism Commission, which I co-chair, in which it focuses not only on autism, but the impact on that individual throughout life and the family who has autism? And does he realise it is his failure to get a statement, to get an assessment for years and years that is causing so much unhappiness in those families?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I certainly recognise some of the challenges that the Honourable Gentleman references. The Sen review will be published in the coming days, and the Honourable Gentleman may have questions. Following on from that, I'd be very happy to meet with him to discuss it further.
We now come to the urgent question. I call Crispin Blunt.
Mr. Speaker, to ask the Government if it make a statement on the executions in Saudi Arabia this weekend.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are shocked by the execution of 81 individuals on the 13th of March. The United Kingdom strongly opposes the death penalty in all countries and in all circumstances as a matter of principle. The UK Ambassador has already raised UK's strong concerns with the Saudi National Security Advisor and their Vice Foreign Minister. We will continue to raise UK concerns with Saudi counterparts through our ministerial and diplomatic channels and seek further clarification on the details of these cases. No aspect of our relationship with Saudi Arabia prevents us from speaking frankly about human rights. Saudi Arabia remains a Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office human rights priority country, including because of the use of the death penalty and restrictions on women's rights, freedom of expression and freedom of religion or belief. We regularly raise concerns with the Saudi authorities through diplomatic channels, including ministers, our ambassador and our British embassy.
We now come to Crispin Blunt.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for granting this urgent question, which itself recognises the execution of 81 men on one day as of profound concern to this House and to our country, which has so many shared interests with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Does my right honourable friend agree that this represents a new low for human rights and criminal justice in the Kingdom, coming only a week after the Crown Prince had promised to modernise the Saudi justice system? A decade ago, as a Justice Minister, I supported government-to-government work to help Saudi Arabia modernise its justice system as we work to build a strong and positive partnership with the Kingdom. Can my right honourable friend confirm that emptying death row this way is not the kind of modernisation anyone would have had in mind when we signed off support to Saudi Arabia in happier times? Does my right honourable friend recognise the exquisite difficulties that this has presented to our Prime Minister? What assurances will he be seeking from Saudi Arabia in respect of human rights on his next visit there? Will he at least seek an assurance that execution of those arrested for alleged crimes when children will cease? Will he make clear to the Crown Prince how appalled friends of the Kingdom are, particularly in light of the state's assassination of Jamal al-Khashoggi only 3 years ago? Does my right honourable friend think these events have been the behaviour of a friend?
I thank my honourable friend. I'll try and take these points in turn. The UK's relationship with Saudi Arabia is of great importance, ranging from kind of national security to economic interests. But that nature of our relationship does mean that we can speak frankly about human rights. And as I said in my opening remarks, the United Kingdom strongly opposes the death penalty in all countries and in all circumstances as a matter of principle. And Saudi Arabia is well aware of the UK's opposition to use the death penalty. As I say, we raise these concerns with the authorities through a range of ministerial and diplomatic channels. And regarding the juvenile death penalty, we raised concerns with the Saudi authorities regarding the juvenile death penalty application. And regarding Khashoggi, the UK has always been clear that his murder was a terrible crime. We condemn his killing in the strongest possible terms, which is why we've sanctioned 20 Saudi nationals involved in the murder under the global human rights regime.
Minister Bambuck-Torrell.
We on this side of the House are appalled and utterly condemn the execution of 81 Saudi men on Saturday. Saturday's massacre is the largest execution in Saudi Arabia's history, and we do not believe that the timing of the executions was coincidental, taking place whilst the world is focusing its attention on atrocities elsewhere. Referring to the killings, the Interior Ministry stated it won't hesitate to deter anyone who threatens security or disrupts public life. This demonstrates just how low the bar is for execution in the Kingdom, where individuals can be sentenced to death for protest-related offences or exercising their right to free speech. The mass execution comes in a week when the Prime Minister reportedly plans to travel to Riyadh to meet Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. We've seen what happens when human rights abuses go unchecked. So I ask the Minister what steps the government is taking to ensure that human rights are at the fore of any future trade deals with Saudi Arabia? And will the Prime Minister be expressing Parliament's outrage at this massacre when he meets the Crown Prince? And what assurances will the government be seeking to ensure that such mass executions carried out by a friendly country never happen again?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his questions. And as I say, we were deeply shocked by the execution of the 81 individuals on the 13th of March. And as I stated already, no aspect of our relationship with Saudi Arabia prevents us from speaking frankly about human rights. And we do regularly raise with Saudi authorities through diplomatic channels, including ministers and our ambassador and the embassy, our concerns in terms of human rights. As I said, it also remains the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office human rights priority country, particularly because of the use of the death penalty, as well as kind of restrictions on women's rights, freedom of expression and freedom of religion or belief. In terms, I'm not going to speculate in terms of Prime Minister's visits.
Sir John Redwood.
Doesn't this bad news reinforce the urgency of the UK producing more of its own oil and gas to reduce dependency on these powers? And couldn't that include onshore gas only where the local community and people are willing? And wouldn't that be speeded up if they were given a royalty?
In relation to this matter, it's important that all partners work together to ensure the stability in energy markets, and OPEC also has a key role to play here.
We now come to SNP spokesperson Alan Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a deep personal interest in Saudi Arabia. I grew up in Saudi Arabia. We spent much of the 80s in Riyadh. I'm a friend of Saudi with all the political issues that it has. And I'm glad to hear the Minister say that there's a frank dialogue with the Saudis about judicial matters, but it doesn't, I say this gently, seem to be having much of an effect on the Saudis themselves. And friends speak bluntly to friends, and executing in public by beheading 81 people, whatever their crime, whatever their alleged crime, is an atrocity. And there needs to be consequences beyond the harsh criticism. So I'd modestly suggest two. I note she's not going to speculate on the Prime Minister's visit, but she can relay the House's concern that surely the Prime Minister's visit next week should not go ahead. And there should be a consequence. And also, we have a programme of judicial and justice cooperation with the Saudis. Surely that has to end, or at least be suspended, pending the deep concern across all the House on each and every one of these cases. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm afraid that if I'm going to get asked multiple times about the Prime Minister's visits, colleagues are going to be disappointed because, as I say, I'm not going to speculate about the Prime Minister's visits. But what I would say, and as I've said in previous answers, our relationship with Saudi Arabia does mean that we can speak frankly about matters and human rights. As I said at the outset, You know, we were shocked by the execution of these 81 individuals, and our ambassador has raised strong concerns of the UK government with the Saudi National Security Advisor and their Vice Foreign Minister.
Fair Jones.
What happened in Saudi Arabia was a gross violation of human rights and places strain on global relationships, which are crucially important right now. Does the Minister agree with me that no country found to be complicit in human rights abuses, such as those we are currently seeing in Ukraine, should receive a penny of UK taxpayer money in international aid?
Yeah.
So I thank my honourable friend for her question. And I think this goes back to the fundamental point here, which human rights violations are something that we do raise. Where we see them, we are not ashamed. We will not stand back from actually raising these where they seem to happen.
Nadia Whittam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the UK government has given the Saudi regime an estimated $20 billion in arms sales since the start of the war in Yemen, despite clear breaches of humanitarian law. It's extremely likely that British weapons have been used to kill civilians. In light of the executions on Saturday, will the Prime Minister cancel his planned visit? And will this government do what it should have done long ago and end arms sales to the Saudi regime?
So I thank the honourable lady for her question. As I've said before, I suspect I've been saying a few times, I'm not going to preempt the Prime Minister's travel plans. In terms of arms exports, we take our strategic export control responsibilities very seriously. We examine every application on a case-by-case basis against very strict criteria. And we will not grant an export licence if we thought it was inconsistent with the strategic export licensing criteria, including respect for human rights and international humanitarian law.
Bob Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a boy, I witnessed 2 executions, one of them beheading in what is now called Yemen. I'm vehemently against the death penalty. Could I ask the Minister if the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office has any idea what percentage of the Saudi population actually is in favour of capital punishment?
I thank my honourable friend for his question. I'm afraid I don't have that answer specifically, but let's be really clear. The United Kingdom strongly opposes the death penalty in all countries and in all circumstances as a matter of principle.
Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In 2018, the Saudi Arabian government told the United Nations that if the crime committed by the juvenile is punishable by death, the sentence shall be reduced to a term of not more than 10 years detention. However, the following year, 6 young men sentenced to death for childhood crimes were executed, as was in 2019 Mustafa al-Dawish, having recanted a confession extracted under torture. The Minister says we can speak frankly to the Saudi Arabian government. Will she frankly say to the House of Commons now that the promise the government made to the United Nations that it would not execute minors for crimes committed when they were children was not made in good faith?
As I've mentioned in relation to the juvenile death penalty, the government raises concern with the Saudi authorities regarding the juvenile death penalty application, and we do very closely monitor these cases and routinely attempt to attend the trials. The Saudi Human Rights Commission announced a moratorium on the death penalty sentences for individuals who committed discretionary crimes as minors in April 2020.
James Gray.
Mr. Speaker, I strongly support the Minister's reluctance to speculate on the Prime Minister's travel arrangements. Absolutely right, she should do so. But should the Prime Minister happen to find himself in Saudi Arabia in the near future by chance, would she not agree with me that that would be a very good opportunity to make our points about this being an absolute human rights outrage in the strongest possible terms to the ruling party in Saudi Arabia?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving me the opportunity to kind of reiterate that I'm not going to speculate, and he understands why. But, you know, as I say, diplomats, ministers, all clearly have frank conversations regarding human rights with Saudi Arabia. And as I said at the outset, we were actually shocked by the executions at the weekend.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister may be shocked, but she shouldn't be surprised because this sort of thing has happened before, and actions do speak louder than words. If the Prime Minister goes in the next few days to Saudi Arabia, we will be sending a very clear signal that no matter what we say, we're not really bothered about this sort of thing. It is reported that we have a Judicial Cooperation Memorandum of Understanding with Saudi Arabia. Will the Minister commit to publishing that, along with the human rights risk assessment made by the Government in relation to it?
I think, coming back to the kind of key point in this, is that given our relationship with Saudi Arabia, we are able to have those frank conversations about human rights. We are opposed to the death penalty in all countries under all circumstances. And as I said earlier on, Saudi Arabia does remain a Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office human rights priority country, particularly because of the use of the death penalty.
Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Saudi Arabia has, at best, an ambiguous relationship with revolutionary Islamism. Can the government and the minister confirm that in seeking to lessen our dependence upon one source of oil and gas, we do not end up creating a source dependency on another unreliable and sometimes hostile regime?
Referring to this particular issue, I think the key point here is that it's important that all partners and international partners work together to ensure the stability of energy markets.
Walter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mass executions are particularly grotesque and barbaric, but there's no due process in the Saudi justice system, a widespread use of torture. 75% of those executed were for non-lethal offences. Will she specifically answer about the case of Abdullah al-Hawaiti, again a juvenile when the alleged offence was committed, on death row, awaiting execution at the moment? She's known about that case for months. What representations has she made to the Saudi authorities, and what does she intend to do about that now?
So, I've been clear in terms of our opposition to the death penalty. We raise a number of different cases with the Saudi authorities, but I would happily follow up in writing following this urgent question on that particular case.
Brendan O'Hara.
Speaker, the Greek writer Aesop once said that a man is known by the company that he keeps, and that equally applies to states. This week, while the Prime Minister's former friends in Moscow were committing atrocities in Ukraine, his existing friends in Riyadh were executing 81 people. It is obvious that the oft-repeated words of condemnation mean nothing. And isn't it time that the country, rather than cozying up to these regimes, completely resets its relationship with countries that do not share our values and who feel because of their wealth they can continue to trample over basic human rights with impunity?
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. What I would say, actually, is given our relationship with Saudi Arabia, that we are able to have frank conversations about human rights.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister confirm whether there is a Memorandum of Understanding on judicial cooperation between the United Kingdom and Saudi Arabia? And if so, will she publish it?
As I say, I think I've set out quite clearly the way, the various ways in which we raise kind of human rights with the Saudi Arabian authorities.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I press the Minister? Does she not see any contradiction between rightly ending dependence on Putin's Russia for fossil fuels, but then seeking to replace them by going cap in hand to another murderous tyrant who executes his own people and to whom we sell arms that are being used to kill civilians in Yemen? Is she aware of reports in the US that Saudi Arabia is pressurizing President Biden to repay for access to oil by supplying more military support for their war in Yemen? And can she assure us that this government would not tolerate a more arms for oil deal with this murderous regime?
Minister.
So in terms of energy, I think it's, we do have, following the Russian invasion of Ukraine, rightly, we are having to phase out Russian oil, and which is absolutely the right thing to do. And so it's important that all partners work together to ensure the stability of the markets.
Tamanjit Singh Desi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There seems to be a bit of a pattern developing here. When the Deputy Prime Minister visited Saudi Arabia in June, the regime subsequently executed Mustafa al-Darwish, a child defendant convicted of protest-related offences. And now, days before the Prime Minister is due to go to speak business with the Saudi monarchy, the regime has executed 81 people. Does the Minister agree that the Saudi monarchy sees this UK government as a soft touch, as people that it can ignore, because ministers do not possess the backbone to stand up for British values and for human rights, and therefore the regime can go on to act with impunity and continue with its bloodshed?
Minister.
As I said on a number of different occasions, it's because of our relationship with Saudi Arabia that we are able to have very, very frank conversations about human rights. We were shocked by the execution at the weekend, and as I say, we do raise our concerns, and the ambassador has raised concerns with the Saudi National Security Advisor and their Vice Foreign Minister.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund a right and proper and fit-for-purpose owner of Newcastle United?
Minister.
So, the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund is a significant investor, having invested billions in the UK and other Western markets. It operates across a range of sectors. We welcome the purchase of Newcastle United and a sign that the UK remains a great place to invest.
How do you square that?
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our foreign policy, including our trade deals, must be underpinned by human rights and the rule of law. Would the Minister not agree that it is arguably the absence of this in our current foreign policy and our current international dealings which has led President Putin to feel that he can absolutely ignore all of this and do what he wants in Ukraine?
Minister.
So, let's be really clear. The international community in the UK have been absolutely clear throughout that the Russians' invasion of Ukraine was unprovoked, unjust and illegal. And we will do everything we can to limit Putin's ability to wage war. But on human rights, but let's be clear, we do call out human rights violations where we see them.
Cherry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm puzzled as to why the Minister is so shifty about the existence of this Memorandum of Understanding on Judicial Cooperation.
Can I just say, I'm not... Honourable lady, just sit down a second. Shifty, I'm not a comfortable word for the House to use, especially when it's a straight accusation of the Minister. Whatever we might think, I think with your good language from your court days, I'm sure we could come up with a nicer way.
Very happy to put it more politely, Mr. Speaker. I'm puzzled as to why the Minister is so evasive about the persistent questioning about the existence of this Memorandum of Understanding on Judicial Cooperation. If it doesn't exist, why doesn't she just say it doesn't exist? If it exists, why can't we see a copy? And why can't she tell us whether there's a human rights risk assessment and publish that?
Minister.
Well, I don't know how that being described as shifty, but Mr. Speaker. Anyway, look, I've been really clear in terms of what we do as a UK government in terms of raising human rights with the Saudi authorities. They remain a human rights priority country. And as I say, ministers and the ambassador all raise these concerns about human rights.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It may be one thing for the morally bankrupt Premier League to accept money from Saudi Arabia, but for the UK government to turn around and say it welcomes its investment is another thing. Our frank talking to Saudi Arabia has amounted to nothing more than diplomatic finger wagging and has created no change whatsoever in their attitudes. So can we expect, in response to this atrocity, any change at all in the relationship between the UK and Saudi Arabia?
Yeah. Minister.
As I've said on a number of different occasions during this urgent question, the relationship with Saudi is of great importance, covering a range of kind of national security and economic interests. But it's because of that relationship that we are able to have frank conversations about human rights.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I am wearing the colours of my football team, Newcastle United. And I think it's important to say that in utterly condemning this atrocious, horrific massacre, I speak for many, many of my constituents and Newcastle United fans. And does the Minister agree with me that whereas football fans have no control or influence over the ownership of their beloved clubs, and especially in a Premier League awash with dirty money, the UK government has both control and influence in who it trades with and who it engages with? And will she tell us what she is going to do with that control and influence? She said what she's not going to do. What is she going to do? And is she going to make it absolutely clear that sports washing is not an option?
Minister.
So, with regards to Newcastle United, we've never had a role at any point in the club's prospective takeover, and this has been a commercial matter for the Premier League.
Kerry McCarthy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is all incredibly depressing. In 2012, when I was Shadow Minister for International Human Rights, I remember trying to ask questions about David Cameron's visit to Saudi Arabia, and it was like something out of Yes Minister, the responses. I kept being told nothing was off the table, or a wide range of issues was discussed, and it went on and on and on. Never got an answer. And now we hear that 2 years ago he went camping with Lex Greensill and the Saudi Crown Prince, which I think says a lot for what probably was discussed then. But can I ask the Minister, if the Prime Minister does go to Saudi next week, and I hope he doesn't, will he raise the case of Abdullah al-Hawati that was mentioned by my colleague from Hammersmith? 14-year-old at the time of the crime, was sentenced to death last week.
Minister.
I'm trying to think of another way to kind of suggest that I will not be speculating in terms of the Prime Minister's travel plans this week, next week or next month.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite the Minister's protestations, nobody in this chamber believes that we would see the same weak response from this government if these murders had taken place in Iran, for example. Isn't it the case that because Saudi Arabia is Britain's single biggest weapons customer, because Britain is Saudi Arabia's single second biggest arms supplier, isn't it simply the case that whether it's weapons for murderers in Saudi Arabia or peerages for Russian oligarchs in London, for this Tory government, money talks louder than human rights ever will?
Minister.
Yeah. I've been pretty clear that the government was shocked by the execution of these 81 individuals at the weekend. I've also been clear that the UK opposes the death penalty in all countries under all circumstances as a matter of principle. And Saudi Arabia is well aware of the UK's opposition to use the death penalty.
Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Saudi authorities have said that these executions were carried out in compliance with Saudi law. So given that we know that the Saudi justice system falls far short of international standards, including obtaining confessions through torture, and the use of the Special Criminal Court for the prosecution of human rights defenders and political activists. What recent discussions has the government actually had with the Saudi authorities about the failings of the Saudi justice system and the cases of those in jail for trying to exercise their fundamental human rights?
So, as I say, we regularly raise concerns about human rights, but specifically Lord Ahmed, the Minister responsible for human rights, raised them during his visit to Saudi Arabia earlier in February.
Mike Kane.
Pope Francis recently said, Mr. Speaker, that the death penalty is an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the human person, inadmissible in all cases. Following on from the member for Beckenham, there are 1.7 million Catholics who live in Saudi Arabia, 8% of the population. King Salman has already got cordial relationships with the Church, and the Crown Prince recently visited the Archbishop of Canterbury to talk about inter-religious dialogue. What pressure can we put on civil societies groups to explain to the royal family there that many of their constituents, many of their people do not believe in the death penalty, and give them an understanding as to why we don't believe in it?
Minister.
And I think the UK government and partners do kind of raise human rights issues and also our opposition to the death penalty. As I've said, the UK strongly opposes the death penalty. Saudi Arabia remains on the human rights priority country, and that is in part because of the use of the death penalty, but also restrictions on of women's rights, freedom of expression, and also freedom of religion and belief.
Alan Dorrans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good afternoon. Mr. Speaker, last week the Minister for Defence Procurement was in Riyadh at the World Defence Show, actively promoting the UK arms export to the Saudi regime. Does the Minister agree that in light of the weekend's mass executions, the UK government should seize all arms trades with a regime that shows no sign of respecting human rights?
So regarding arms exports, as I've said in an earlier answer, we do have very strong criteria by which we examine every application, and we will not grant an export licence if it's inconsistent with the strategic export licensing criteria, including in respect of human rights and international humanitarian law.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister's said many times now the government makes representations and has frank discussions. Can she point to a single example of any impact or effect of those representations?
Minister.
So if I just take one example, in terms of this weekend, let's be really clear. The UK ambassador has already raised our UK's strong concerns with the Saudi National Security Advisor and their Vice Foreign Minister. But we do raise our concerns with the Saudi authorities, and Lord Ahmed raised human rights concerns during his visit last month.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To what extent does the Minister personally think it is appropriate to continue to sell arms to the brutal Saudi regime, which has no regard for human rights of even their own people, publicly crucifying men after beheading them for homosexuality and stoning to death any woman deemed to have committed adultery?
I think I've answered the question in relation to arms exports on a number of occasions, so I refer back to previous answers.
Margaret Farrell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The European Saudi Organisation for Human Rights said that in the cases it had been able to document, the charges involved not a drop of blood, even under Saudi rules used to establish criteria justifying executions. Opacity in the Saudi judicial system and witness intimidation lend further secrecy to the nature of the charges against the executed, many of whom are believed to have been Shias. What material steps, not conversations, material steps are the government taking to show Saudi Arabia that they will not tolerate these barbaric abuses?
As I said, we were shocked by the executions, and we have raised our concerns, and through our ministerial and diplomatic channels we will seek further clarification on the details of these cases.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Can I thank the Minister for her reply, declare an interest as Chair of the APPG of freedom of religious belief and express concern over the restrictions in religious beliefs in Saudi Arabia. These executions are deplorable and shock the people of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Has the Minister made any representations to their Saudi counterparts to review the rationale behind this mass execution and whether we can apply any diplomatic pressure to urge a reconsideration of executions carried out in this way and which appear to be a spectacle rather than the murderous, sombre, sober and shocking event that it truly is?
Minister.
I'm grateful for the honourable gentleman for his question, and I know how passionately he campaigns on all matters of freedom of religion or belief. As I've said, the UK ambassador has already raised our strong concerns about the executions at the weekend, and through ministerial and diplomatic channels we will seek further clarification on the details of these cases.
We now come to the statement on the update of Ukrainian sponsorship scheme. I call the Secretary of State, Michael Gove.
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I would like to make a statement on our government's response to help those fleeing the conflict in Ukraine. This government, this House, indeed everyone in the United Kingdom, continues to be in awe of the bravery of the people of Ukraine. They're victims of savage, indiscriminate, unprovoked aggression. Their courage under fire and their determination to resist inspires our total admiration. The United Kingdom stands with the Ukrainian people. My right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, has been in the vanguard of those providing military assistance. The Foreign Secretary has been coordinating diplomatic support and, with the Chancellor and the Business Secretary, implementing a new, tougher-than-ever sanctions regime. The Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office and the Home Office have also been providing humanitarian support on the ground to Ukraine's neighbours, helping them to cope with the displacement of hundreds of thousands of people. But more can and must be done. To that end, my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has already expanded the family route. She has also confirmed that from tomorrow, Ukrainians with passports will be able to apply for UK visas entirely online, without having to visit visa application centres. As a result, the number of Ukrainians now arriving in this country is rapidly increasing, and numbers will grow even faster from tomorrow. We also know, however, that the unfailingly compassionate British public want to help further, which is why, Mr. Speaker, today we are answering that call with the announcement of a new sponsorship scheme, Homes for Ukraine. I'd like to thank my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, officials in the Home Office, in my own department and across government for their work over the course of the last days and weeks in order to ensure that we can stand up the scheme as quickly as possible. And in particular, I would like to thank my honourable friend, Richard Harrington, now Lord Harrington of Watford. His experience in ensuring that the Syrian refugee resettlement programme was a success will prove invaluable in making sure that we do right by the people of Ukraine. The scheme that he has helped us to design draws on the enormous goodwill and generosity of the British public and our proud history of supporting the vulnerable in their hour of greatest need. The scheme will allow Ukrainians with no family ties to the UK to be sponsored by individuals or organisations who can offer them a home. There will be no limit to the number of Ukrainians who can benefit from this scheme. The scheme will be open to all Ukrainian nationals and residents. They will be able to live and work in the United Kingdom for up to 3 years. They will have full and unrestricted access to benefits, healthcare, employment and other support. Sponsors in the UK can be of any nationality with any immigration status, provided they have at least 6 months leave to remain within the UK. Sponsors will have to provide accommodation for a minimum of 6 months, and in recognition of their generosity, the government will provide a monthly payment of £350 to sponsors for each family whom they look after. These payments will be tax-free, they will not affect benefit entitlement, nor cancel tax status. Ukrainians arriving in the United Kingdom will also have access to the full range of public services, doctors, schools and full local authority support. Of course, we want to minimise bureaucracy and make the process as straightforward as possible, while also doing everything we can to ensure the safety of all involved. Sponsors will therefore be required to undergo necessary vetting checks And we're also streamlining processes to security assess the status of all Ukrainians who will be arriving in the United Kingdom. From today, anyone who wishes to record their interest in sponsorship can do so on gov.uk, and the webpage has gone live as I speak. We will then send any individual who registers further information setting out the next steps in this process. We'll outline what is required of a sponsor, and we will set out how sponsors can identify a named Ukrainian individual or family who can then take up each sponsorship offer. Because we want the scheme to be up and running as soon as possible, Homes for Ukraine will initially facilitate sponsorship between people with known connections, but we will rapidly expand the scheme in a phased way with charities, churches and community groups to ensure that many more prospective sponsors can be matched with Ukrainians who need help. And we are, of course, also working closely with the devolved administrations to make sure that their kind offers of help are also mobilised. I know that all concerned want to play their part in supporting Ukrainians who've been through so much to ensure they feel at home in the United Kingdom. And I'm committed to working with everyone of goodwill to achieve this. Mr. Speaker, our country has a long and proud history of supporting the most vulnerable during their darkest hours. We took in refugees fleeing Hitler's Germany, those fleeing repression in Idi Amin's Uganda, and of course those who fled the atrocities of the Balkan Wars. More recently, we've offered support to those fleeing persecution in Syria, Afghanistan and Hong Kong. And we're doing so again with Homes for Ukraine. We're a proud democracy. All of us in this House wish to see us defend and uphold our values, and to stand shoulder to shoulder with our allies, and to offer a safe haven to people who have been forced to flee war and persecution. The British people have already opened their hearts in so many ways, and are hopeful that many will also be ready to open their homes and to help those fleeing persecution find peace, healing, and the prospect of a brighter future. And that is why I commend this statement to the House.
We now come to Shadow Secretary of State, Lisa Nandy.
Mr. Speaker, we were so relieved to hear the Secretary of State was going to announce a scheme to allow Ukrainian refugees a route to safety after weeks of delay. But a press release is not a plan. And we are really deeply concerned about the lack of urgency. He went on TV yesterday to claim that Ukrainians could be here by Sunday, but he's just told us that they will still need a visa under the current application process. These are 50-page forms that have to be completed online, asking people who have fled with nothing to find an internet cafe to upload documents. They don't have water bills, mortgage documents to prove who they are. The Home Office has been incredibly slow in issuing these visas. As of this morning, only 4,000 have been issued. We are lagging way behind the generosity of other countries. We could simplify this process today. We could keep essential checks, but drop the excessive bureaucracy. He knows it. Why hasn't it been done? For weeks, the British people have been coming forward in large numbers to offer help. It's been moving, heartwarming to see the decency and spirit on display in every corner of this country. But can he clarify what exactly the government will be doing, especially in relation to matching families to sponsors? Because on his tour of the TV studios, he suggested several times that people who are willing to sponsor a Ukrainian family need to come to the government with the name of that family, who will then rubber stamp it. He can't seriously be asking Ukrainian families who are fleeing Vladimir Putin, who've left their homes with nothing, to get onto Instagram and advertise themselves in the hope that a British family might notice them. Is this genuinely the extent of this scheme? Surely there's a role for the Secretary of State in matching Ukrainian families to their sponsors, not just a DIY asylum scheme where all he does is take the credit. Can he please clarify what the government's role is going to be? There's been a lack of urgency to get people here, and there's still a lack of urgency to ensure we support them when they do. My honourable friend and I spoke with council leaders earlier today. They stand ready and willing to help. Why hasn't anyone from his department picked the phone up to them? I spoke to charities last week who he will ask to act as sponsors. They are acutely aware that the people who are coming will be quite unlike previous refugees. 2 million people are on the march, children alone, mums with very young kids, older people. The brutal reality of what's happening in Ukraine is that working-age people have stayed behind to fight. Now, they will have healthcare needs. They'll need school places, maternity care, social care. One council leader told me today that his city, which traditionally plays a major role in welcoming refugees, has only 9 secondary school places available. Has it not occurred to him until this point to pick up the phone to leaders like him before he went into the TV studios and promised the earth? These charities and council leaders are the same people who stepped up during COVID. They spin gold out of thread every single day, and what is keeping them awake at night right now is how we do right by people and keep them safe. It was only a few months ago that the Home Office placed a child into a hotel in Sheffield that they had been told was unsafe, without even bothering to tell the council, and he fell out of a window and died. Will he ensure that every council is contacted by close of play today? Will he work with them to do the vetting checks that are needed? They're experts in safeguarding children. Will he not just trust them, but support them? Will he put a safety net in place in case a placement breaks down? His department over the weekend confirmed that families who are left homeless in that situation will not be able to claim for housing costs under universal credit. Surely that can't be true. Surely we are not going to ask people who fled bombs and bullets to lie homeless on the streets of Britain. I suspect, Mr. Speaker, he has felt as ashamed as I have to watch how this government has closed the door to people who need our help. People have been, he shakes his head, people have been turned back at Calais. They've been left freezing by the roadside with their children. We've had planes leaving neighbouring NATO countries packed to the rafters, except those to London, because this government has turned people away. The British people who've come forward have shown that we are a far better country than their government. But unless he gets a plan together, a real plan, not just a press release, all he is effectively announcing is plans to fail the people of Ukraine twice over. He said today that they have our total admiration, and they do. But they need more than that. They need our total support.
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her questions and what I think was her support for our scheme. The Honourable Lady asked about the visa application process and the length and the bureaucracy associated with it. Well, as was announced last week in the House of Commons by the Home Secretary, and as I repeated today, it is the case that for Ukrainians who have a valid passport, it will be the case that they can be, have their application turned round within 24 hours, not in the way to which you referred. That was announced last week. It is time that instead of manufacturing synthetic outrage, she actually kept up with what government, and my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is delivering. She asked about matching. She's already had a go. She asked about matching families and sponsors. We are moving as quickly as possible in order to ensure, working with NGOs and local government, that individuals in need can be found, the families and the sponsors whom they need, in order to get people into this country as quickly as possible. I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for speaking to people in local government this morning. I was speaking to people in local government 10 days ago in order to ensure that this scheme was capable of being delivered. She asks why it is that we are requiring matching in the way that we are. It's because our scheme has been developed in partnership with non-governmental organisations who have welcomed our approach. We've been doing the practical work of ensuring that refugee organisations on the ground can help to shape our response in order to help those most in need. Now, I know that the Honourable Lady wants to help. I believe that everyone in this House wants to ensure that the scheme is successful. So she makes a number of valid points about the need for school places. That is why there is additional funding available to every local authority that will take refugees in order to ensure that school places are provided. She asks about wraparound care. We're providing additional funding to local government in order to ensure that the expertise required in order to provide those who've been traumatised with the support they need will also be there. She asks about the rapidity with which vetting checks, but also the comprehensive nature of those vetting checks, can be guaranteed. We've been working with the Home Office in order to streamline that process so it is quickly as possible, but also to ensure, as she quite rightly pointed out, that we do not place vulnerable children in accommodation where they might be at risk. In all of these cases, every single one of the points that she has made has been addressed by officials, NGOs and those in local government in order to make sure that our scheme works. It now falls to the Honourable Lady, her questions having been answered, to get behind this scheme to support those open-hearted British people who want to ensure that we can do everything possible in order to help those in need. It is time to rise above partisan politics and to recognise that this is a united effort in which our colleagues in devolved administrations and those in NGOs are working with the government to put humanity first.
Sir Roger Gale.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend has generated a great deal of progress in the last few days, but he'll understand that we still have a very long way to go. I don't want to bore the House or you, Mr. Speaker, with the experiences that I had in France last weekend, but I learnt a lot from them. I'd be very grateful because we need a meet and greet system, and there are other things that we need to put in place very quickly indeed if this is going to work. So would my right honourable friend or Lord Harrington meet with me either today or tomorrow to make sure that we can avoid some of the elephant traps that face us if we don't get this right?
Yes, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend who, over the course of the last 10 days, has been in touch with me daily in order to outline offers of help from his constituents and others, a model constituency MP and a humanitarian. And Lord Harrington will meet my honourable friend tomorrow in order to make sure that we can operationalise those offers of help.
We come to SNP spokesperson Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And can I start also by thanking people across the UK who have come forward with incredibly generous offers of accommodation and support for Ukrainians. And of course, we will do whatever we can to support this initiative. But we do very much regret that it is only phase 1 today. Things are still not going fast enough. And we will also continue to argue that the best response available to the government is to stop asking Ukrainians to apply for visas altogether. On that point, why are people accepted onto this scheme still going to have to apply for a visa as well? Yes, of course, some of these people may be able to apply online, but an online process is not necessarily a fast process either. On sponsorship, we welcome that people with limited leave to remain will now be able to be sponsors, but when does he anticipate that charities, churches and community groups can also play their part? He explained a little bit about the vetting processes, but how will sponsors be supported to undertake their role? And that's not just a question of cash. And what happens if a sponsorship does not work out? What move-on support will be available? On financial support, Mr. Speaker, will the £350 per month be available to sponsors such as community groups as well as to individuals? Does access to public funds mean full access, including the housing element of universal credit? And is there £10,000 local authority support per person, as was reported in the press? And what about the most vulnerable people, the orphans, the very elderly and the others who will never know about this scheme's existence, never mind how to apply? Can, for example, UNHCR refer someone onto this scheme or for resettlement? And what support would be provided in those circumstances? And finally, Mr. Speaker, what discussions has he had with the Scottish and Welsh governments about their request to operate as super sponsors, and will he endeavour to make that work?
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for his questions, and I thank him for his support for the scheme. He makes the point about making sure that we can speed up all of the security and visa checks as quickly as possible. Well, as I mentioned earlier, my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has already acted in that regard. It is the case that from tomorrow, anyone with a Ukrainian passport will be able to apply online and should, thanks to a surge in the number of caseworkers in the Home Office, be able to have permission very quickly granted, turned round, a PDF will be sent straight to them. They can then fly into this country to a warm welcome. And it is the case as a result of that, in our visa application centres, the surge of staff there will be able to deal with those individuals who, for whatever reason, do not have a passport or the capacity to secure one quickly, and that means that we can more quickly process the number of Ukrainians who wish to come here. As was pointed out earlier, 4,000 visas have been granted. The numbers are due to surge during the course of this week. He makes the point that charities, churches and community groups have all stepped up. We want to ensure that we are working with all of them during the course of this week in order to facilitate their role, not just in matching individual sponsors and Ukrainians who might benefit, but also extending the reach of support that we give, so it's not just a roof over someone's head, it is also the valuable interpersonal support of which so many are capable. And I had the opportunity when I was chatting to faith groups earlier today to talk not just to representatives of the Ukrainian churches, but also the Church of England, the Church of Scotland, and the Roman Catholic Church, including the Roman Catholic bishops in Scotland, all of whom are anxious to ensure that we do everything that we can to help. We will ensure that for those individuals who, for whatever reason, may find that a sponsorship solution doesn't work for them, that the local government partner